Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ryan here from Straight Up Spine and Posture. Today I wanted to make a video about some of the more effective and popular stretching programs that we have while people are sitting home with the coronavirus. Today we're going to talk about a group of muscles called the hip flexors, and these are a likely cause of low back pain in today's population. In particular, we're going to focus on a muscle called the psoas, starts with a P, and that's one of the hip flexors. Now most people are familiar with the hip flexors when you're sitting doing your thing for a long period of time and you go to stand up and you have this tightness in your hips. So a lot of people will do one of these numbers to stretch that out. That muscle that goes from the spine to the hips is called the hip flexor, in particular the psoas muscle. And so what it does is it flexes or brings the hip to the thigh close to the spine. So it's a muscle that's deep in the body on the front of the spine. So it's underneath the abdominal muscles and in front of the back muscles, and in the thighs, deep in the groin. So it's a funky muscle that most people aren't familiar with unless you know it's there, how to stretch it out, how to strengthen it. It's not a very intuitive muscle. So let's talk a little bit about how it's involved in back pain and why it's so common in today's Western culture, okay? So this is a drawing here, the front of the spine. So you've got the actual vertebra in the front, you got the hips, and then you got the leg bones, okay? So the psoas muscle starts on the front of the spine, it joins together with a funky muscle on there called the iliacus, and then it goes down to the leg. And again, it's responsible for bringing that leg up, bringing the thigh up towards the spine. So it really has three functions. When we sit, this muscle is turned off and it's short, so it's kind of over time it gets progressively shortened and also weak, which is a funky combination to have in a muscle. That muscle is short, so we got to stretch it, and it's weak, so we got to strengthen it. So those are the two things we got to focus on. And what happens is when we're sitting for a long period of time, that muscle is going to be short and weak, and so when we go to stand up, it can't stretch out, so it kind of traps the hips, and this will force those low back muscles to fire up. So if you have really, really tight low back muscles that are on all the time, sometimes they can just be fighting the psoas muscle. So if we stretch it out, a lot of times those low back muscles will chill out. The other thing that happens when this occurs is when that muscle is so tight and the back muscle is so tight and they fight each other, is it can compress the discs and lead to disc herniations or make disc herniations last a long time or kind of never heal. So we get those patients with chronic low back pain who have had it forever. This is a great muscle to focus on. So what we're going to try to do is take that muscle from its short state that it's in when we sit all the time, and then when we stand it lengthens out. What we want to do is we want to stretch that puppy out so that we can extend our back, or conversely so we can bring that hip into extension. So we can use our butt muscle, our glute, which is a really important muscle. We want to be able to use that to move the leg in a natural way. So if that psoas muscle is really tight, it's going to stop it. It's not going to let it do it. That can lead to labral injuries, hip pain, things like that too. So it's a common source of hip and spine pain. Okay, so we're going to go through a couple stretches that we can stretch this muscle out. We'll go through a couple exercises where we're going to engage that muscle and make it go through a range of motion to kind of build the function of the muscle. And then we'll talk about a very particular piece of equipment called the Pso-Rite, which is a direct compression, so we can get like a manual release out of it. So it's not super comfortable, more of an advanced technique, but it's something that we like to do here in the office and we get great results with, okay? Let's switch over to the table and we'll talk about how we do those exercises and stretches. All right, let's talk about some stretches and exercises for the hip flexors or the psoas muscle in particular. You don't really need any equipment for this, but some really basic equipment can be very helpful, okay? Piece of equipment number one that we're going to need is a simple band. This is a 2 by 10 inch circular band. You can get these on Amazon for like $5. I'll try and post a link below. So they come in a variety of strengths, so this one's pretty easy. You can get a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, stuff like that. The other thing that's really helpful to have is a stretching strap or a yoga strap. We like this one called from TheraBand. It's got loops, it's a little bit elasticy, and then it's hard, so it's nice because you can kind of keep track of your stretches. So this is a nice thing. Then that other thing that I mentioned, the Pso-Rite, this thing is super ridiculously overpriced. It's $80. If you really have back pain, that might be a great $80. Otherwise, it's a piece of plastic, so it's a pretty expensive piece of plastic, but we love this thing. So the hip flexor, again, brings the thigh to the spine. So it's a classic kind of problem with the hip when we're sitting. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to try to stretch that out, okay? And the easiest most classic type of stretch for this is a stretch called the runner stretch. You've probably seen this one before and you just didn't realize exactly what it was stretching. This is a common problem muscle with runners because they engage it so much as they're running. So with this muscle, what we're looking for is we're going to stand or we're going to kneel so that one knee is on the ground and the other leg is in front. Now we're trying to stretch out this muscle, not necessarily the quad or the thigh muscle. We'll get some stretch in that, and that's an important muscle. But mainly we want to be engaging this deep muscle in there. So you should get this deep kind of aching sensation in the hip, kind of like the lower abs below the belly button, that type of area. The muscle that does the opposite movement of the psoas, like we discussed, is the glute max, or your butt muscle. So we want to flex that as we're doing this. So if we stretch, we can start like this, lean forward so we get some stretch in the hip there, and then we can flex that butt cheek, the right butt cheek, and get a nice stretch through the thigh and deep in the hip. So this is kind of a beginner stretch. It's a good place to start. I like to hold this for about 30 seconds per side, switch to the other side, do that about 3 times. So that's a classic easy runner stretch. Another basic stretch is one called a couch stretch, where you use the edge of a table or a couch, and pretty much we're going to lay one thigh flat and then extend into that so we get that big stretch through here. So what that would look like is being on the edge of something and just sit and relax, and we'll get that stretch deep in the front of the thigh there. And we can gently extend. We don't want to hyperextend the back, so we don't want to arch it too much. So kind of keep the core engaged, but we're going to press it flat so we can stretch out the front of that hip. Same thing, hold for about 30 seconds. We'll do that about 3 times. Okay? Another classic stretch, particularly popular for disc injuries, is a movement called the McKenzie exercise, a la a physiotherapist from New Zealand, Dr. McKenzie. It's a great movement. We use this one pretty frequently with disc injuries, very popular with physical therapists, things like that. And what this is similar to a Cobra pose, Cobra pose from yoga. We're going to lay flat. This one we're using our hands to press up. So we're using our pecs, so we're not doing a Superman. And we're just going to gently press up until we get a gentle stretch down the front of the spine, the psoas. We don't want to do this so hard we get anything pinchy. And then usually we'll just do repetitions of this where we hold for a little bit, kind of squeeze the butt cheek as we're getting in there so we can drive those hips forward, stretch that out. So those are 3 kind of basic standard stretches that we'll use. I prefer to start with this next stretch called the strap stretch. So this, in my opinion, is a good intermediate stretch where you can get an actual release of both the quadricep muscle, the rectus femoris, but also deep in there the hip flexors, the iliacus, stuff like that. So for that one, it's very helpful to have the stretching strap. You could literally use a belt though, kind of throw it around your foot and pull it up. And what we want to do is we want to take that strap, we're going to put it around our leg so that the strap is coming out the bottom, and then we're going to lay face down on the floor or the table. And what we're looking for here is we're going to gather tension in our leg. So on the front side of the thigh, the quad, we're getting some stretch in there. So what I like to do is kind of pull a little bit of tension onto that quad so that we're getting a nice quad stretch. And then from there, I'm going to take my right hip and I'm going to drive it down into the surface of the table or the floor. And I'm going to squeeze my right butt cheek so that I'm driving my hip in there. And you can keep your body up on your elbows like this, or you can lay your body flat. If you've got back issues, sometimes it's easier to lay it flat so that we don't get too much hyperextension of the back. Otherwise, it's okay to keep it up like this. And then we're going to build that tension until it's really strong. And then you can just hold it like this. So this is a nice stretch. If you're keeping that right butt cheek, the glute engaged, you should get that stretch in the front of the thigh. You can hold this for up to 2 minutes per side. Rotate, do the other one. You can do it a few times if you want. So it's a big, strong muscle. It can handle some vigorous stretching. So no need to kind of baby it. You can go right at it. Main thing to look for here is that we're not getting any knee pain. Certain types of knee injuries can be susceptible to this. So if you've got previous knee surgeries, you might want to look into this one before you do it. Otherwise, it should be pretty safe on the knee. And then as we progress into this stretch, we want to engage that butt cheek to actually lift that off the table. So I've got pretty tight psoas muscles, but some patients can get a heck of a lot more than me. Otherwise, this is what we're looking for. We want to work that knee off the table so that we're using our hips to extend that knee, extend that thigh, and create extension in that thigh so that that back bending We want more of that to come from the hip and less from the low back. So this is over time how this stretch helps to reduce stress on the low back and kind of redistribute that motion from the hip, or I'm sorry, from the low back onto the hip, which is what we're looking for. The hip is supposed to have movement, the low back is supposed to be more stable. So those are the basic stretches. So you got the runner stretch, you got the couch stretch, you can do McKenzie's, kind of something similar, and then you can also do the strap stretch. So those are all great stretches. Next, we'll move on to the exercises. There's a few classics for this one. The basic one that I like the best is an exercise called a dead bug, which is kind of an abdominal exercise. So we'll get the general abs, but we'll also get deep in there. We'll get the psoas. We'll get some other stuff too. So that's why I like this one. It's kind of a nice catch-all, real safe on the back, pretty hard. You can do that with a band later, but for now we'll just use body weight. So let's talk about this one. So what you're going to do on this one is you're going to lay flat on your back, and it's supposed to look like a dead bug, like on the front of a Raid can or something like that, the cockroach that's laying face up. And what we want to do here is we want to engage the core, so we don't want our back to extend, and we don't want to round that back either. So we want it to stay in a neutral configuration, okay? So just nice and light. We're going to squeeze the muscles hard, but we don't want the spine to bend very much. We're going to try to keep the knees straight up and down so that they're not down and they're not too far up. So try and keep them like that. We want the shin bones to be out front, and then we don't want the legs to be rotated in too much, out or in too much. We want to keep them straight. We're going to put the arms right up in the air. We're going to kind of engage the core, and then slowly we're going to extend one leg out. You can bring it all the way flat if you're comfortable with that. Otherwise, I recommend starting about a 45-degree angle until you get the hang of this and feel nice and stable. And then we'll just test each side. Same with the arms. And then the actual exercise is doing one leg and the opposite arm. And what it looks like is we would extend it out, hold this for about 5 seconds, nice and stable, bring it back in, and then do the opposite. And we just alternate these, and I do this usually as a timer. So we want to hold for about 5 seconds. You can do a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, depending on how you feel. And we just want to get a nice burning sensation going in both our abs and deep in there, the psoas muscle. When it contracts, it pulls this up. So with this, we're doing something called an eccentric exercise, where we're lengthening that muscle as it's under load. So this is like a funky way to kind of stretch it and make it stronger at the same time. So it's a nice way to build, we call that function. So we'll get more of a general muscle function going here, and nice and engaged, okay? So same thing, we do this for about a minute, maybe repeat 2 or 3 times. I like to do things in circuit where we're going to alternate, but this is a great exercise. You get a nice burn. It's advanced enough that you can really feel it, but not too easy, but not too hardcore where it's going to stretch your back out and tweak things. So it's a great exercise. The next one that we're going to do is called a band march. So this one, you can do this without a band. So if you don't have a band, you can do it just by itself, but a band is definitely helpful. What we're going to do here is we're going to focus on flexing the hip while we engage the butt muscle, the glute, on the other side. So the glutes, again, are the opposite of the hip flexors. So they're definitely important to build up and strengthen, but we want to do that while we're engaging the other one. So we kind of teach the body how to engage the glute while the other psoas is activated. So we kind of teach it a functional pattern, if you will. This one is going to be very similar to the dead bug. We're going to lay on our back, and what we're going to do with this one is we're going to take a band and we're going to put it between our legs, like so, between our feet. And then we're going to pull it just a little bit apart and make sure that our knees, that our feet, our knees, and our hips are all in a line. So for instance, we don't want to let our legs rotate out like that. We want to keep kind of good leg posture, as it were, with this. And what we're going to focus on, if I'm exercising my right psoas, I'm going to bring this up so that I've got a nice contraction here. And then on my other leg, I'm going to straighten this out just so that it almost touches the ground and hold it there. And my focus is on this right psoas, so I'm getting a nice contraction there. Now, after we've held this for about 10 seconds, we're going to remain holding this, bring the other leg up until this one's all the way up. Now our focus is on the left psoas. So I'm squeezing this, I'm bringing it up as far as we can. I'm holding that, I'm going to straighten out the right leg, and now we've got a nice contraction of the left psoas. Hold this one for about 10 seconds. Nice and slow, bring that right back up. Now my focus is again on the right. We're going to extend that left leg and hold that. Same thing, we're going to hold that, so you should be feeling it in your right butt cheek, your left butt cheek as you hold this. One more. I've switched my focus to the left. I'm pulling that up, and I'm actively pushing away with that right, and I'm going to hold that. Okay, about 10 seconds. I like to set a timer for a minute, something like that. Do about 3 sets, a little bit easier than counting. Just kind of focus on the technique. If you want to hold for a little bit longer, a little shorter, that's fine. So that's one called the band march. That's probably my favorite Psoas one. The last one that we're going to do is the classic glute bridge. So this is not exactly a Psoas exercise. You get a nice stretch, but it's going to really focus on building the opposite muscle, the glute. We pretty much sit on and crush all day, so it's one that needs a little bit of love, get some blood pumping in there and grow it a little bit. That's what we're looking for. So this is a classic exercise. You're probably familiar with this. All we're going to do here, we're going to lay flat, feet are on the floor, knees aren't moving apart, anything like that, and we're going to focus on tilting our pelvis backwards a little bit so we get a little bit of stretch, and then we're going to squeeze our glute muscles and lift this up, and then as you squeeze really hard, you should get a little bit of stretch on the front if the psoas is tight, and you'll feel some good activation in the glutes. Okay, these are a pretty easy exercise. Someone who's done these, you can do these pretty much forever. But in general, I like to do sets of about 15 to 30. Once you get pretty good at it, at the beginning you might only be able to do 10. And just nice and slow, we're just going to squeeze that glute, get a good activation. And we want to do enough of these until we get pretty much a burn going on in the muscle. So you can do these, as many as you need to. More advanced things, we can add some bands to make it harder, some weights. But in the meantime, if you're just sitting at home, this is a nice way to stretch out that psoas and activate that glute muscle a little bit. Okay, again, we do about sets of 15 to 30, we do about 3 of those. So if we were going to do the exercise program in a circuit, we would do the dead bug first, about a minute. Then we would do the band march, again about a minute. And then we would go ahead and do the glute bridge. And we would do the dead bug, the band march, glute bridge, dead bug, band march, glute bridge, and we go through that 3 times so that each muscle group gets a rest between those. Okay, so those are our basic psoas stretches and exercises that we do here in the office. I usually recommend that patients do those 2 to 3 times per week, and we usually make pretty nice progress in terms of range of motion, pain levels. It allows us to make much better corrections to the actual shape of the spine. The psoas muscle is a very important muscle in kind of restoring a normal lumbar lordosis. It has a lot of effects to an anterior pelvic tilt, if you're familiar with that. So some postural issues, some structural alignment issues. It's a muscle that kind of messes with everything. So improving both the function, the strength, and the flexibility of that muscle is very helpful in us treating low back patients. So to finish, I'm going to show you the Pso-Rite. This is an advanced thing, so this isn't for everyone, but if it's really tight, this is something that can be really beneficial. It's very similar to me. As a chiropractor, I can get in and work these muscles directly, so I can put your hand on it, stretch it out. Super uncomfortable, but it works really well. So this is a way that you can kind of do it at your own pace. Again, it's super overpriced. Not going to deny that. I don't make these things, but there's only one on the market that works really well, and that's this one. So what this thing is, it's a hard plastic block, and you can put this on your stomach. If your belly button is here and your hip bone starts here, it goes right between there. So you can put the peak, and we're going to lay on it, and then we're going to stretch it out. So I'll show you how this works. So what you're going to do is you're going to put this on a flat surface. You're going to find that spot and just relax onto this. So this isn't for everyone. If you've got an aortic aneurysm or diverticula, if you've got appendicitis, stuff like that, those are kind of contraindications. But for most people, this is safe. You should probably check with your doctor or your therapist before you do this. Otherwise, for the majority of patients, you're going to take a deep breath, let this settle in. I'm going to do my left leg. So what I would do is shift my weight to the left. It's going to compress that psoas. It's deep and funky. And then I'm going to straighten my left leg and lift my left shoulder a little bit. Try to lengthen the spine out, and you get this deep stretch. You can do some breath work and let that stretch out. So it's a real funky stretch. It's a good way to get in there and release it. It's very effective for a lot of our patients, despite not being super comfortable. They really like it long term, okay? So if you're seeing this on YouTube, if you've got some questions, leave them in the comments. I'll get back to you. If it's on Facebook, go ahead and comment. I'll get back to you. Otherwise, I hope everyone stays safe through this coronavirus pandemic. We'll see you guys back in the office on April 8th, okay? Stay safe. Bye.